Welcome to our online Zoom audience to tonight's presentation, which is the 10th Keene State College Faculty Student Scholarship Seminar this academic year. For students registered for IS 199, please sign an attendance sheet when you exit. I'll be waiting for you, so swing by and sign. And Professor Welsh will make sure that you are marked as present for tonight's session. If you're here via Zoom, we ask that you mute your microphones and cameras and keep your cameras off, or allow us to mute them while the talk is happening. Afterwards, you may ask questions by chat or raise your hand icon to unmute and ask something of the presenter. Tonight's speaker is Dr. Tammy Warner, who is an assistant professor in the Department of Business Management. Dr. Warner earned her doctorate in natural resource economics at the University of Connecticut. She holds an MBA from Cornell University and a BS in biology from the University of California. The courses she teaches here at Keene State include managerial accounting, strategic management, and financial management. In the private sector, before coming to Keene State, she worked as a manager and consultant, experiences that she brings to life in her courses. Her scholarly interests and research center around sustainability and corporate social responsibility, entrepreneurial education, and the management of nonprofits and rural businesses. All of these, in addition to her conservation background, come together in tonight's talk about farming in the coast off of New Hampshire. Her talk is appropriately titled, "I Love It When a Plan Comes Together, Farming the Sea." Please join me in welcoming Dr. Tammy Warner.
I don't normally get applauded when I start. I never get applauded when every once in a while. But this is my talk. It's called "I Love It When a Plan Comes Together," which is a heck of a lot more interesting sounding than "Business and Economic Planning for Seaweed Aquaculture in the United States," which is the actual title of this project that I'm involved with. This is my job, and this project that I'm involved with is to make financial models. No one would be surprised to know about that. And what I also need to do is turn them into actual business planning tools that people can use to develop their business to farm in the sea. The thing is that this project needs to bring together, all sorts of, not just the individuals that are involved with the project, but also topics and ideas. This isn't just a business plan, for like opening up a cookie store in Keene State College, which I have my students do, by the way. This is a business plan that involves, looking at the science, looking at the economics, looking at the logistics of how you actually do this work, because it's not simple work. And of course, then also looking at and bringing those all together in the business and financial issues. And so I wanted to put a picture of myself up there because with these masks, nobody's going to recognize me if you see me out on the quad. So that's me in my backyard, and Dean Khalid just told you who I am. I'm a professor. I've only been here since 2017, and I teach accounting and finance classes. But before I came here, I worked with startup businesses, small businesses, to help them get going, and help them get the resources and economic resources, money that they needed to start and grow. And then also, in my graduate work, I worked with organizations, nonprofit conservation organizations all over the world. It was actually a really cool project. Marine protected areas, trying to figure out how marine protected areas can be started up and managed in different settings, and how you could tie those to the desired outcomes that they had, conservation of whatever resource it was that they were trying to work on. So that is one strange background, people. I'm fully aware. That is a weird mix, finance and nature. And so I feel like I need to explain this project to two very distinct audiences here in the room. I mean, I look at that Zoom and I recognize half of the names on the black boxes of Zoom, and I recognize quite a number of the faces in here, but not all of them, because I know that a lot of you are scientists and science students. And so, maybe science students don't really want to think much about business. I know that when I was a biology student, I wanted nothing to do with business. I thought business was going to ruin the planet. It was the root of all evil. Capitalism was bad. I wanted nothing to do with it as a biology student. And then we have management students here who, maybe don't think too much about what nature has to do with business stuff. They're just, in my classes, just thinking about the numbers, and Professor Lee's classes, they're thinking about marketing, but maybe they're not thinking about what the natural world has to do with what these businesses are that we're trying to build and trying to manage. Come on, clicky, clicky. Clicky, clicky. There we go. So I need to explain this project to both groups of people in a way that makes sense and doesn't go on too long, I hope. Okay, so here's how it's going to go. There's going to be a lot of background. There's going to be a lot of background on this because this project is seated in a whole bunch of constructs that the people who work on this work understand, but you guys wouldn't necessarily understand. And I have to apologize that I literally pulled all the graphics from here just straight off of Google Images, so some of them don't have great resolution. It looks nice back on that, on that screen back there. So we're going to talk about a little bit about how business and the economy and nature are related. We're going to talk about this idea called externalities, or how the activities of the economy actually spill over into the natural world, both in a positive and a negative way. We're going to talk about what it means to develop an industry. And then we're going to talk about kelp and seaweed. Yay. And then I'll launch into what this actual project is. Because you need to kind of understand all that stuff in order to be able to assess whether this project is even worth doing. So, macroeconomics. I know all you business students took macro, and Professor Doling told me that you should have seen this, what's called the circular flow, right? So the idea of macroeconomics is that firms, which can be anything, they don't have to be big old nasty factories, anything that brings together factors of production to produce economic outputs. They produce economic outputs, goods and services that are purchased by households. Households provide the factors for production, labor, into the firms, and then firms give households wages, and households buy what the firms are building. So that's the circular flow in the economy, macro 101. But we all know that that doesn't tell the whole story, right? Because firms rely on natural resources for the raw materials of their production. And over here in the economics of natural resources, that's where I spent many years of my life working on the economic aspects of natural resources. And of course, households rely on natural resources as well. We all use direct natural resources in our house. We heat them with oil, heat them with wood, just to name a couple. But then at the same time, right, firms spill stuff back out into the environment. We usually think of this as kind of a negative thing. It's pollution, usually. More broadly, though, we can call pollution a negative externality, right? And the reason that we use that word externality is because it's external to sort of the pricing system and the way that firms make their choices about costs and prices and things like that. And then also, of course, households produce externalities as well. Okay. So this is the first kind of general background concept that you need in order to be able to understand what is the point of this project. The point is that there are externalities involved in economic activities. And the thing is that firms are not just factories. And externalities are not just pollution. There are positive externalities as well that are associated with many industries. For instance, education. Education is an industry that provides, in my opinion, the output of education is educated human beings, students that go out into the world and make the world a better place. And that making the world a better place is the externality. Everybody benefits when we have a more educated populace. That's not part of what the cost is of educating one of you people, but it's one of the benefits that the whole state gets. And that's why states support public education. Most states. Agriculture has positive externalities as well. Right? I have a farm down there in Swansea. That's what you saw in that picture. I have some bees. I have some bees because I want honey, but those bees run around, they pollinate everybody else's fields. That's a positive externality. Vaccination programs have positive externalities. Everyone in this room has gotten 4 shots of a polio vaccine. The fact that we all get polio vaccines means that society as a whole in the States, in the United States, does not have polio anymore. It's eradicated. And the positive externality of vaccination programs is that those who cannot get vaccinated don't have to worry about getting those dread diseases. And polio is a horrible disease. It causes paralysis. Nobody wants that, and nobody has to worry about it in the United States. That's a positive externality from vaccination programs, and there are also positive externalities associated with seaweed. Now, we want to encourage, as a society, we want to encourage positive externalities. And the government has some tools, some policy tools in its arsenals to encourage externalities. One of those being subsidies. Right? Subsidies is when the government basically makes it cheap for you to do something they want you to do. The government can also directly support or fund these activities like public education. And then the other thing that the government can do is pay people like me to provide expert assistance in supporting the development of an industry. I know how to do business planning, one of my superpowers. So the global seaweed industry, first thing I want to note, those pictures up at the top, those are people farming seaweed in other countries. In Asia, the one in the picture in the middle, that of course has been going on for forever, for a long, long, long time. Asia produces and consumes the bulk of the world's seaweed. On the left-hand side, that's some women in Zanzibar, which is an island off the coast of East Africa, where seaweed farming is sort of a development project. It's a way for these women to engage in the cash economy that they had not been able to do before. And I actually had an opportunity to meet them, see those projects while I was working in Zanzibar on a different project. So if anybody wants to talk or ask about that later, however, I'm told that I tend to talk too much, so I will not say much more than that. But seaweed is used for all sorts of things. You probably eat seaweed every day and don't know it. And then, of course, down at Bikini Bottom, they make kelp shakes. Because all of those people who are not management students here don't know that I have SpongeBob in pretty much every one of my classes in some way or another. Just saying. All right. But the thing is, the kelp is the most important seaweed in America right now. Kelp grows in cool water. This is a graphic that was produced by our partners in the Sea Grant program. You can't see it. But what it says right here, that sugar kelp is being grown in multiple states. Not all of these states are growing it commercially yet. New Hampshire is not growing it commercially yet, but they do have some sort of research going on. It's being grown commercially in Alaska and in Maine, and they're starting it up in Connecticut. I'm waiting for the aw. Aw.
Everyone wants otters.
Aw, that kind of kelp has nothing to do with our project. But it's an otter, and they're just so darn cute. They live in the kelp, actually. Otters are very important in the kelp forest, the wild kelp forest ecosystem in like Northern California, all the way down through from Alaska. And it's a conservation success story, really. When I was a kid in college out there, they were done. They were extirpated practically. They had been hunted because they conflicted with abalone fishermen. People decided to protect them. Now they're all over the place. You can go paddling for 20 bucks and just check them out. And they are, in fact, that cute in real life if you have never seen them. But come on. What we are interested in is sugar kelp. This is Saccharina latissimus, I believe. If you want to remember, your lats, your latissimus dorsi, those flat muscles across your back, that's what these are named for. And they kind of look like, I don't even know, like a latissimus dorsi. Okay, so we are looking at developing a viable industry for sugar kelp. So there are lots of positive externalities that occur as a result of farming sugar kelp. Of course, a kelp forest in its natural form has lots of positive externalities. For one thing, the otters are there. But as wild stocks are depleted, right, replacing them with farmed kelp actually is helpful to the whole ecosystem in many ways, both the natural ecosystem and the shellfish farming. This graphic is from a project that was done. It was sponsored by the Nature Conservancy, but it was actually done by the University of New England out in Biddeford, I think, Maine, where they're looking at what are the ecosystem values of farmed kelp. So it is helpful for a lot of people that farm kelp. They also farm shellfish. And so, the kelp is helpful with, mitigating pollution. If it comes in, the kelp can help pull it out of it basically absorbs the bad chemicals. It supports the fish stock. It provides a nice little place for the little baby fishies to hide, provides habitat, but it also has tremendously positive effects on climate change. Kelp grows so fast you wouldn't believe it. And as it grows, what do plants use? I mean, it's not plant, it's an algae, but what do they use for food? They use carbon dioxide for food. They turn carbon dioxide into oxygen, just like trees do. So they suck all that carbon out of the ocean. Carbon in the ocean, not only is it, sort of messes up the atmosphere, but it also messes up the pH of the ocean. And this is where my undergraduate degree in biology kind of reaches the limits of my science knowledge. So kelp helps with sequestering carbon. It helps with creating food, because kelp is a food, which is a low carbon footprint food. And then it also helps to adapt to the results of climate change by increasing the oxygen output of the coastal ecosystems and providing help with storm protection. One of the effects of climate change is going to be increased violence of storms as they hit the coast. And when you have plants kind of buffering the wave intensity, so it's protection to the coastal communities. So those are all positive externalities. Now, why are we interested in farming them? Well, it grows fast. It grows up to 20 feet in a season. And by a season, we literally mean 10 weeks. They're planting this stuff, not 10 weeks, I'm sorry. 3 months. They're planting this stuff right now in early November. They're going to harvest it like April, May. 4 months. And it's going to be 20 feet long. It grows big. It grows in the winter. So fishers like lobstermen and shellfish farmers, they're not really doing much during the winter, and to get them out of their wives' way, we want them to be out there farming kelp, because otherwise, who knows how many marriages will last in coastal cold weather in the wintertime. And I shouldn't say it like that, actually, because there are a lot of women that are involved in this as well. Demand is booming. This is a market that is just exploding. This is one of the slides I did not include. I am not going to show you a graph of increasing demand. And it's, of course, it's good for the environment, and they do good stuff out of it. They make good stuff out of it. So here's a little YouTube intro.
Cheers. I would say this is like at the top end of the weirdness scale for brewing.
I was approached by Smutty Nose Brewery, and they had interest in developing a kelp beer. And it just so happens that we're doing research just off the coast here, growing kelp in a variety of manners and several other seaweed species.
Never brewed with kelp before, so kind of had to just take a stab at it.
The sugar kelp it's sort of like the super kale of the sea. It's full of vitamins and nutrients, trace elements that we don't get in some of the plants that we eat from our gardens. We harvested 60 pounds that we brought to them. They take the kelp, they stick it in a freshwater bath to clean off some of the epiphytes that might be growing on it, and then they put it in their kettle and they boil it for about an hour.
Well, this is how we get the seaweed out. It was kind of an arduous, labor-intensive brew, more so than usual. My opinion with any beer is when you're adding an adjunct like seaweed or blueberries or whatever you might be adding to it, it still has to be a beer first. So you kind of build the recipe up, build up the malt bill, the hopping, and then you have to take into consideration how much flavor you're trying to extract from whatever adjunct you're throwing in there. I don't want it to taste like candy. I don't want it to just taste like low tide. My biggest concern was bringing a flavor profile that beer drinkers would enjoy. I mean, obviously it's going to taste briny and kind of oceany. We figured a nice like malt forward Scottish red ale would work well, so we'd have a little balance of that salty briny flavor quality balanced with a bunch of malt sweetness from the barley. So this is our finished product, Selkie beer. It ended up at 4.9% alcohol by volume, so fairly on the sessionable side. You can have a few of these and still walk home.
We think this could be a whole new niche for us with seaweed. The brewery market is something new and exciting because there's so many microbreweries in New England that this kelp could fuel into, and it would be a fresh local product that could take advantage of.
So that was all the background. So that's awesome. What is this actual project, right? Business and economic planning for seaweed aquaculture in the United States. So this project is going to go on for 3 years. We're 1 year into it now. The idea is that we are going to develop business planning and management tools for seaweed aquaculture systems, focusing on kelp. These business planning tools are going to include an assessment of the economic value of ecosystem services with an on-off switch. Because, the thought that the market is going to pay for ecosystem services at this time, maybe yes, maybe no. Although this one farmer that I was working with up in Maine, he's got somebody paying him for carbon credits right now. And he's working on a second one. And these are household name companies that I cannot say what their name is. And then we're also going to develop outreach and education tools. And we're working with the Seed Grant, which is essentially agricultural extension programming for the sea, for fishers and aquaculturalists. And the goal of this project is to support the development of a vibrant and sustainable seaweed aquaculture industry. So this is a cast of thousands involved in this. Bob Pomeroy and I are the principal investigators. That for students, that's like the person who's like responsible for the whole project. Bob's job is project management, also known as nagging me to get things done, nagging everybody to get things done. That's what a project manager does. Dave Beaudry told here, I told you that. I'm on the business planning. And then we have partners, the Seed Grant partners, basically everywhere the kelp can grow. And so our Seed Grant partners are working with the industry, working with growers, working with fishers, working with regulators in their states. We have this company called Green Wave out of Connecticut that are actually developing the industry, the for-profit aspect of this. They're trying to, help farmers with tools. They're making seeds for this, or not seeds, spores. And then we've got a couple of actual resource economists on this. A guy named Diego Valderrama, who's down at George Mason. I never remember if it's George Mason or George Washington, but anyways, he's doing the ecosystem services assessment, and he's also going to be doing a life cycle analysis of the kelp growing industry. There is not a life cycle analysis in place yet for this industry, so this will be new. And then Su Zhang, she's our research assistant down there at UConn. So why do we need to do this? Well, this is the same reason that we make management students take accounting and finance class, right? If you don't have financial information, then you can't get access to financial resources. You can't get loans. You can't get investment. If you don't know your numbers, you can't get the money that you need to grow a business. And if you can't get the money that you need to grow a business, then the whole industry is undercapitalized. In order to develop an industry, you need access to capital. Now, we just went through that whole rigmarole to determine that this is an industry worth developing. And this is where number crunchers like me come in. Somebody's got to do it. It's a tough job. So what does it mean to develop an industry? Now, if I have any of my strategy students here, this should look somewhat familiar. If it doesn't look familiar, when I explain it, you'll know where we are, right? So industries have a life cycle and they start out little itty bitty babies and nobody knows anything. And then, they grow in sort of, you hope, they grow in like an S shape with rapid adoption of the technology of whatever it is that they're selling. And then they come to a mature place and then they die off. And so in the introductory phase of an industry, right, the market doesn't know anything about the product. The industry is fragmented. Nobody's making any money. You're not sure what the demand is. And so, that's sort of where we are now in America, in Cal. We're all the way down here on the far left-hand side. Now, my strategy students, that was where we started with that bike business, right? You guys are losing money hand over fist because there was no demand yet for your products. But then when you enter the growth phase, right, you get a rapid increase in demand. The industry tends to become more consolidated. The companies are spending their money on R&D and they're getting more professional in the way that they run their businesses. But in order for the growth phase to occur, it requires capital to grow the business. Strategy students, you guys all just got 16 million bucks to make more bikes and sell them. That's what we're doing here. It all comes together like a plan. All right. So business planning kind of takes our analysis of what's going on a little bit beyond what strict economic analysis is. Business planning, the World Bank wants to support the development of seaweed aquaculture, and they came right out and said it, that good business planning is key to the successful expansion of the seaweed aquaculture industry. And if we think about what good business planning looks like, right, these need to be financial models that are flexible, like I said, with on-off switches. So we can have, an assessment of ecosystem services as part of the model, but then we can have a yes or no that says, am I going to keep that piece or not? Right? You want these models to be flexible and that can accommodate changing parameters as the industry evolves. And we want to, like I said, we want to include the ecosystem services payments because it could happen. And we want it to happen. We want to quantify it. And then the thing is that they have to be user-friendly. I see some of these things that are out there as business planning models, and they're utterly overwhelming to any normal person. And so they need to be user-friendly. They need to be used. They're only as good as if they ever get used. What did I just do? All right, and so I start the business planning process. I don't know that everybody does it, but my students will not be at all surprised to know that I start the business planning process by making a financial model. And each of these steps in the operation of a seaweed farm has financial parameters associated with it. So the first thing that they need to do is grow those little kelp spores on strings that are on spools that are in aquaria, in a climate controlled environment with sterilized seawater. So They got to go get the seawater. They got to tote it back to their lab. They got to build the lab. They got to have, microscopes to count, to look and see whether the spores are doing anything. They got to have the right nutrients to get these things to grow a little bit, right? There's all those different elements of just having that nursery that all have costs associated with them. And that have, a certain kind of like skill set for the person to be doing that. I mean, this is lab work. This doesn't look all that much different from the labs in the science building, except they're colder. Degrees to be precise. Right, and then kind of at the same time, they also got to go out there and they got to get a whole bunch of bits and pieces and doodads and strings and chains and anchors and buoys and all this stuff to build out where they're going to put that those seeded kelp once they get them going. Right, so that has costs associated with it as well. It's also dependent on weather. You got to get out there and do it sometime when you're not going to get blown off of your boat trying to deal with these heavy materials. Maybe you have to hire somebody to build you the anchors and whatnot. There's costs associated with all of that. Come on. Cookie, cookie. There we go. And then they got to take those spools, literally put them on a stick, go out there in the boat, pay somebody to go out in the boat with them because you should not be going out in a boat alone in the middle of the winter, and actually wind those spools, wind the seed string along these lines where they're eventually going to be growing. Costs associated with that. You got to put fuel in the boat. You got to hire somebody to help you out. You got to buy the spools of string if you didn't grow them yourself. And then you got to go out there every week or two in the winter, in the cold, and look at your babies. Make sure they're growing. Costs associated with that, your time, your fuel, etc. And then harvest time. I put a lot of pictures on here because I wanted to give a sense of scale. First of all, look how long these things are. It's like 6-8 feet long. They have to manually cut them with scissors. And then, there's a few different ways they can do it. One of the ways they can do it is they can get out there on a little tiny little dinghy and cut them and then heave them up onto the lobster boat. It's insane. And then you put them in these bags. You're limited as to how much you can harvest on one day by literally the square footage on the deck of your boat. And just to give you a sense of scale, right? That's one of those like cable spools. That's how big these bags of kelp are. Each of those bags weighs about a ton. And so each of these steps in the value chain has costs associated with it. And I'm sure you can tell that I've spent some time trying to get my head around what all these costs are and what all these steps are. Now, the ecosystem services piece, right? So what I just showed you was the just like straightforward economic value chain stuff, normal stuff that you would do in any kind of business plan. Ecosystem services assessment, it's a specialty within the world of environmental economics. These are positive externalities that we're talking about here. And what I would say about this is for many ecosystem services, the question of ascribing value to them becomes kind of, I guess I would say controversial. Because when there's not a market, when there's not a clear market, like if you say, okay, I'm going to sell you my carbon credits because there's a market associated with carbon credits, and that's one thing. But how do you put a value on providing habitat to juvenile fish? And how far down do you go along that path? And this is where ecosystem services assessment and ecological economics in general becomes a little outside of the sort of philosophical purview of environmental economics, because environmental economics looks at actual prices in the actual market. There's not really a market for like the worms in the mud that allow for the fish to grow that are growing in the kelp. And you see how this is going. It just goes on and on and on and on. So Diego is going to be doing this piece. What I've just told you is pretty much all I know about it. Because he was having trouble. Those of you in administration might appreciate this. He was having trouble getting his school to buy the software that he needs, that he's got the grant funding for. And I think he finally threw up his hands and said, fine, I'll use the free one. Yeah. Of course, you had trouble at George Mason, and so then he's like, well, why can't you guys buy it for us? You guys like, we can't buy it. So nobody's willing to buy this Dutch software, I think. I don't know. Anyways. So that's kind of where I live, putting dollar values on things that we actually know about, how much all those costs were, and eventually looking also on the revenue side, how much can they sell it for? The thing is, as much as it pains me to say it, financial models are not business plans, right? A financial model is just a model that replicates how your business, how your costs and your revenues come together in a business. No rational human being would call that a business plan, except possibly for me, because I can translate those into normal person language. But actually, right, we start with a financial model, but then we move along to an actual business plan. Now, a business plan does not need to be a book. Nobody goes into business because they want to write a business plan. You have to have a way of explaining what it is that you're going to do. You have to explain what it is that you're going to do to people who might be able to provide support, to your employees, to bankers, to your spouse, to anyone that you meet. And so you can write a book. You can do what's called the business model canvas, which is a more succinct way of doing this. You still need to have all that information, right? But even that doesn't really tell you what you're going to do when you get up tomorrow morning, right? I gave it for instance. So eventually you got to turn that business plan into a project plan. What do we have to do today, tomorrow? What can be done at the same time as something else concurrently versus what's a string of things that has to happen in a sequence? And then once you have your project plan in place, then you can just start working the plan. So you turn those financial models via a business plan, which gets you some desired results, into an actual project plan, which tells you what you're going to do when you wake up in the morning. So our project plan for this project is a very short overview of it. In the first year, we were gathering information. The second year, I'm in the thick of this, which could have something to do with why I'm so far behind in my grading, because it's a lot. We got to complete these financial models, got to populate the business planning guide. Diego is now gotten himself going on the life cycle assessment. Next year, we'll do some more traveling, go check out their operations in Alaska, hopefully time it when those Kodiak bears are there, because Kodiak, Alaska is where they do this. And then the third year is going to be taking the show on the road and teaching people how to use these things. And so, there's obviously, this is an industry that clearly has triple bottom line outcomes. People that live in these coastal communities, there's a year-round employment for more people, which means the local communities are going to be more vibrant, more active. There's more stuff going on longer in the year. Potentially, people would have a sense of wanting to stay in rural New England because they see a future for themselves. We talked in detail about what the benefits are to the planet of doing this. And then my piece of this project is to try to figure out how to make it profitable so that people can have prosperity while having positive outcomes for the planet. How am I doing for time, Norm?
You're killing it. I'm so proud of you.
Because I have one last slide that I question whether I did. I included it and I question whether I want to include it. But I guess I will. Right. So this would be a good place to end. And I'm going to wax philosophical as I do that. So planning is really important, except when it's not. Right? Business planning is essential to the development of this industry. Business planning is super important for any of you that ever think about starting a business. You better have a plan. If you want to know how to make a plan, come be in touch with me, even after you graduated. I love business planning, as you can tell. Project planning is really, really important too. You gotta have a sense of what it is, like how things come together and how to bring a project in on time and within budget. Long-term career planning for college students, maybe not so much. And so, like I said, I was questioning whether I wanted to actually do this slide, but I will. All right. These are terrible pictures, but they make a point. That girl in the top, 1986, big fluffy hair, living at the beach in Santa Cruz, California, where those sea otters live. I had no clue. Excel had not been invented yet. I had no plans for being an Excel-loving business planner. I thought business was horrible. And then over here on the left-hand side, 15, 20 years later, that's me talking to fishermen in Zanzibar about how they run their marine protected areas. And then, of course, after I stopped coloring my hair, there I am with Hootie, living the dream, literally living the dream. I love my job. I would never have been able to plan to be a professor at some public liberal arts college in rural New England. But all you students, if you are clear about what matters to you, and if you are open and willing and excited to learn new things, then you will make a life that makes sense. It will not be my life, it'll be your life, and it'll all work out fine. And I did this because I teach a lot of seniors and they are stressed like I've never seen. I think COVID really threw people's foundation off as far as their ability to be confident in moving forward. And all I can tell you is that if you know what you care about and you are open and willing to learn new things, you will be fine. I promise. And so that, my friends, is that. I'm done. I need to stop sharing and open up the chat. Hi, Cynthia. Where are you? That doesn't look like a horse.
No, that's my kitchen.
All right. Do we have questions? Tammy, why did you think business was so bad when you were 20? No, okay, guys.
We often hear about the downsides of industrial farming like corn and cattle. Are there downsides to this scale of seaweed farming?
Well, actually, aquaculture has a really bad reputation and many aquaculture activities are terrible. I mean, if you go to buy shrimp, you don't want to be buying shrimp from Asia. The shrimp aquaculture, they ruin the mangroves, they feed them all sorts of stuff, it pollutes everything. You want to buy wild caught shrimp. But kelp aquaculture actually is quite benign. In fact, it's positive because they don't use any external inputs. You just throw them in there and they grow. So yeah, there's no downside here. You can't lose. Yes, Professor Travis.
Now, Dr. Warner, the fantastic talk,
Thank you.
and it was on time and under budget.
Thank you.
Uh,
That's my project planning.
I was really fascinated by all of it. And then what I really want to know though is, if you're going to traditionally farm, right, on the land, you got to buy the land.
Right.
So how does this work with water rights?
Yeah, so it's different states have different leasing requirements and with wildly different cost structures. And it's just you lease the land from the state.
Interesting.
Yeah. That's cheap. But then again, they're not making any money. Yeah, they will though.
Talked a little bit, and hopefully this question's within your bailiwick, but you talked a little bit about carbon credits.
Yeah.
And was curious as to if you could talk a little bit about how they're calculated And, how do they measure the amount of carbon that's being pulled out of the ocean through these kelp farms?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and I don't have the answer off the top of my tongue. I could hypothesize because I am a teacher, and that's what we do. When we don't know the answer. So they know how much carbon is sequestered per foot of kelp or per pound of kelp, and there is a market for carbon. So I would expect that the carbon markets will pay by the foot or by the pound for how much kelp is being harvested.
And is your project yet looking for a buyer of carbon credits?
There's a market for carbon credits that is voluntary in the United States, that certain well-known outdoor clothing manufacturers that are privately held and don't have to answer to stockholders are active in, whose name starts with a P. So Patagonia is buying carbon credits, and there are other participants in that market. It isn't my detailed, expertise, but yeah,
There's ecosystem valuations for trees, and so I would imagine it's like a similar calculation for kelp.
yeah. And one of these days, we're gonna put plaques up on the trees on campus,
Yeah. Right,
talking
most
about
tools
the
exist already.
ecosystem services provided by those trees on campus. That was one of it's the beginning of the semester. Let's take on more projects than we can do moments, Professor Travis and I. Professor Semino.
The issue with red tide is serious in the Gulf of Mexico.
Yeah.
Because of all of Mississippi hydrates, I guess, flooding into the Mississippi River.
Yeah.
So does this mitigate, or does it have the potential to mitigate red tide? Because of the
Well, kelp
oxygen.
grows in cold water, so it wouldn't grow in the Gulf. So they're probably operating, in completely different ecosystems. That's probably a question for Professor Hayes, though. I bet she knows more about that.
You answered it perfectly correctly. Different ecosystems.
Tammy,
Yes, who's that, Emma?
it's Emma, yeah. So as a principal investigator, that's what you said you were under, right?
Yep.
Are you more in charge of like the project planning or?
So the role of a principal investigator in a grant-funded project is that you're kind of responsible for the performance of the project as a whole. There's two PIs in this project, me and Bob Pomeroy. Bob is more in charge of the project planning. You're in Dave Beaudry's project management class, aren't you?
Yes.
So Bob is the nag. He emails me every Monday and he says, we got to get this done. We got to get that done. That's what project management is, nagging with a list. And he does it transparently. He's done it for so long that you don't notice that he's got the list. I've worked with project managers before in industry where they literally are walking around with a list, checklist that everybody has agreed to. And they'll say, hey, it's time to do this. You said you do it by this day. And to my mind, that's what a project manager does. Yeah. So Bob, the principal investigator on the project management side for this project is Bob Pomeroy. And yes, a principal investigator would be in charge of overall project management to get the job done.
Do you guys all have, how often do you meet?
Whenever we need to. So right now, we're working on another proposal for another grant to follow up on this, and we've been meeting a couple times a week. But in general, as this project is going along, because Bob and I have a long-standing working relationship, if I know what the deadline is, I'm going to get my piece done so he doesn't need to nag me. And then a lot of the other aspects of managing this project from his perspective involve getting information from the other partners. So all those lists of 10 Sea Grant partners, we need them to give us information. We need them to go and talk to their, talk to the farmers that they work with about their costs or what things are. And so Bob spends a lot of his time trying to get those guys to reply to emails, which is also a lot of what a project manager does. Because the challenge is when you're project managing, these people don't report to you, right? When you're a regular manager, you're their boss. They have to do what you say. When you're project managing, you're organizing a bunch of people's work where there's no direct line of reporting. And so you have to use your wily ways and persuasive skills to get people to do what they committed to. There's your 4 credit course. Yes, ma'am.
I know also kelp is like huge because people are turning to kelp to get, I think it's omega 3s, right?
What,
Yeah, from kelp, like omega 3s from kelp instead of fish, which is like more it's sustainable is not the right word, but like friendly, I guess.
Yeah, it's vegan. It has a lower carbon footprint because it's coming from vegetables rather than animals. Probably also doesn't give you bad breath all day, like fish oil does. Other questions?
There's a question in the chat.
Huh?
Mike Welsh is asking, can you talk a little bit more about current and potential future markets for kelp? You mentioned that it's through the roof, so maybe.
So kelp already has, there's already a lot of demand sort of globally. And it's increasing just strictly because of global population growth in the countries where they eat a lot of it, right? So part of it is the United States just wanting to get a bigger piece of that pie that is growing already strictly due to population growth. There is also in the States, it's sexy now, right? People want to like invest in things that are good for the environment. And so there's a lot of product development going on, cosmetics. There has been talk about pharmaceutical applications. I don't see much of that, but what I do see is food application and fertilizer. It makes a great fertilizer. So, but the demand is global, and the US wants to just get a bigger piece of that global demand, which is growing without really too much involvement on the marketing and product development side yet. There will be, but it's, it starts small. It's an industry that is the beginning phases. That answer the question, Dean Welch?
Yes, thanks, Tammy.
All right. So all you other Dave Beaudry students, did you get a sense of what people have to do for these jobs when I showed you all those pictures? Or you're not here? All of my students, what I'm going to do is hope you took really good notes, and I'm going to give you discussion prompts with a potpourri of random things. The primary thing that I wanted my students to get out of this was, financial planning is absolutely vital. It is a very, very important aspect of it, but a financial plan is not a business plan. There's still the management side of things, right? And so I tend to get totally obsessed with my spreadsheets and with my models, and you guys take my classes, and I'm an evangelist for financial modeling. But when you step back, right, you guys are in a management program, you learn how to manage people, manage projects, get things done within the constructs of a business. And so, hopefully I step back a little bit to say the finance is not the be all and end all. There's people that need to be managed, there's processes that need to be managed as well. So that's what I hope that my finance students got. That's Professor Lee.
Okay, I just read the news, which says that so it's very popular for the plant-based burger right now.
Yep.
One company just landed 3.2 million to turn kelp into burger.
Kelp burgers. It's not even for SpongeBob.
Yeah.
Sign me up.
Very
I would have, if it weren't for COVID, I would have brought in these crackers. They're really pretty tasty. They don't taste like low tide. They just taste a little bit like you've been to the beach and you have that taste still on your mouth, It's really nice.
Well, if there are no other questions, please join me in thanking Dr. Ward.